Okay, I was one of the Army's first space intelligence officers because they developed their space intelligence program at around 1990, and they were looking for strategic intelligence officers to go into it. And I was looking for some new adventures, and I said, okay, I'd like to go into space. So I went to the Army's Space Institute and became a 3Y skilled officer, which is their space activities designator. It was so new that the Institute didn't even have its own classes. They actually punted me to the Air Force, which had a joint space intelligence course that they ran in Colorado Springs at Peterson Air Force Base. And that's how I became qualified as a joint space intelligence officer. And after that, I was assigned to J2X at Headquarters U.S. Space Command at Peterson Air Force Base, which is the major headquarters that has sub-headquarters for NORAD, the North American Air Defense Command with Canada, and, of course, the command center there at Cheyenne Mountain. So I worked there from 1990 to 1994 as a J2X officer, and that was just prior to my retirement from active duty. I thought that was a kind of a good way to finish things off.
Excellent.
So your question is, okay, are there UFOs?
Correct.
For a start. Okay, I got a simple answer. There sure are. And I can say this for a very simple reason, that out there at Cheyenne Mountain, our job was to look at absolutely everything up there in space. NORAD, of course, came into existence to originally look for ICBMs that might be coming over the North Pole towards Canada and the United States from the Soviet Union. But its mission got bigger and bigger until it was required to actually look at everything up there. And if you think about it, there's an awful lot of crap up there in space. And some of it comes from Earth in the form of space junk from all the scores and scores and scores of launches and discarded pieces of metal, over the years that's up there in orbit.
Oh, yes.
And is deteriorating all the time. And there's also all kinds of crap that's passing Earth from otherwheres, from out there in space. It's zipping by the planet, and some of it gets into the atmosphere, and the stuff that's in the atmosphere will either bounce off or burn up, or if it's big enough, it'll land as a meteor somewhere. But to make a long story short, there's an enormous amount of this. If you'll Google something like space junk on the internet, you'll get a rough idea of what a huge amount of garbage there is out there. And we simply cannot track or identify it all. It was coming into our screens all the time, and if somebody pointed at a blip that was going through at a high rate of speed and said, okay, what's that? I haven't the foggiest idea, General. In another 30 seconds, it'll be gone. So the mission of Space Command with regard to UFOs, for you UFO buffs, was really quite simple. We ignored that crap unless there was some reason to think that it posed a danger to the United States. So if you saw something that was big enough and entering down here and looked like it was, headed for a big city or Washington, then you would pay a lot of attention to it in a hurry.
Right.
But other than that, we just screw it, I mean, there's all this stuff going on out there. It's like it's like trying to watch the LA freeways. Good luck.
Wow.
And that's kind of the attitude that we have. So yes, there was an enormous amount of UFO activity up there rather. And some of it could be accidental, some of it could be deliberate. Some of it behaved very coherently, but even that is a kind of a hard judgment call to make, because you think you're seeing something on a radar screen that looks as though it's intelligent activity, and it may not necessarily be that at all. So while I was there, 1990 to 1994, we did not have any invasions, is what I can tell you that.
Understood, yes.
We didn't have anybody that we had to scramble the jets and go up and try and shoot it down. But
that's a good thing.
As far as UFO activity, sure. Lots of it.
So you don't believe we are alone in the universe then? Well,
I think that statistically it would be crazy to say that, and Carl Sagan would agree with me, I'm sure. And if you look up there and you statistically look at the size of the physical universe, that objective universe that I was ranting about earlier, it's pretty damn big.
Oh yes.
And the odds that we are the only planet in all of that's developed, functioning life forms is almost ridiculous. A lot of the work that I did at Space Command was highly classified, above top secret at the compartmented level. The compartments, that I worked in were TK and MJ, and TK has, talent kilo that has to do with the input from the entire satellite system that's up there. And MJ is just what you would think it is, which has to do with contingency planning, that has to do with extraterrestrial concepts. So that entire, if you're talking about X-Files, that's what J2X was involved with. And if you're talking about things like Majestic, that's what MJ was. And I was involved with that level of planning and that level of research. And there's entirely very, very active, thought that's going into both these areas. And I would reassure you, to the point that what H.G. Wells came up with in War of the Worlds is pretty much the last statement on this, and it's also kind of amplified in the movie The Andromeda Strain, because the thing
what a great movie that was.
Yeah, and the thing that is Earth's big defense against any kind of extraterrestrial invasion, if you're talking about that, is simply the planet's biological envelope, because anything that came from another system would be coming from a completely alien biological system, and the odds are that any intercommunication or any intercontact would be lethal in both directions, which is the whole point of the Andromeda Strain movie, was to say that if something comes out here from space and it's alive, it could be hideously dangerous when it hits the planet. And the message in War of the Worlds was kind of the converse, that if the Martians invade this planet, they might come with excellent war machines, but they can't handle the bugs, the biological system here. So I would say that long before you would find somebody actually trying to invade this place or try to eat us, so to speak, you would find an enormous amount of effort that would be at the arm's length level of just analyzing the hell out of the biology of the planet Earth. But I think that you would find that same thing would be a very strong barrier between anything other than indirect electronic spectrum kinds of communication and interaction, such as you'd find in in radio and television and computer interactions and things like that. So that's just pretty much the premise that we were going on in Space Command. And I think there's a lot to be said for it, that the big barrier here, the big wall, Donald Trump's wall,
yes.
so to speak, is just exactly what H.G. Wells and Andromeda Strain said it was: biology. The dangerous thing,
right.
I did a lot of work when I was working on Mind War. I did a lot of work into the research into the nasty underwear of the Central Intelligence Agency when it was working on the MK series of stuff.
Yes.
Came along later than MJ, and the MK was making a big fuss about MK Ultra, which was the business of trying to sort of screw up people's minds with psychedelics and so on. The scary thing was MK Naomi. That was the biological stuff. And nobody paid a whole lot of attention to that. But when I got into that, it made my blood run cold, because you're talking about the worst possible kinds of biological warfare that could be even conceived. And if your listeners, if they're not going to be scared enough by what I said earlier about nuclear bombs and the Tsar Bomba and stuff, tell them to go Google MK Naomi, Naomi, about the biological aspects that were carried out then in the MK series of stuff. And they'll be damn glad, that was shut down without a whole lot of comment at the same time that MK Ultra was shut down, because the whole series of MK stuff that the CIA was screwing around with was closed down at the time that it became a scandal out there in the Congress. But MK Naomi was the scary one, not MK Ultra.
Yeah, that one's not very known. And on a side